All right, we get started. How's everyone doing? Woo! After this talk, there will be a little refreshments break as well. So I want to remind everyone about that. Hope you're having a good time here at B-Sides. Here today. Thank you. Here today. I want to introduce you to Ron Gula. Ron and I have known each other for quite some time. The most memorable memory is when I didn't have a real job like Joe. I was what they call a consultant, which is kind of like being unemployed.
Kind of, it is.
Yeah. And the conversation with Ron is, hey, we're hiring here at Tenable, and we talk about coming to work there, and I'm like, well, what do I have to do? He said, well, you get to use all of our products and do cool stuff and then tell people about it. I'm like, yeah, I think I'll do that. Thank you very much. So I've been doing that ever since, and Ron's very inspirational since then. So I'm happy to introduce Ron Gula, the CEO and CTO of Tenable Network Security.
All right, thanks, Paul. So I'm here to bring you some good news. A lot of times in the media, what do you hear about the government?
It's awesome.
No, it's not awesome, right? They get hacked, they get popped, right? I mean, everybody today said, oh, these guys got popped. I know a different customer out there. I know a different group of people out there who work hard and do stuff, and they have this thing called continuous monitoring. I used to kind of make fun of the government. About 10 years ago, he started talking about even Microsoft, for example, right? We kind of made jokes about that. The reality is they kind of got their act together. They have standards, they have patch cycles, and it's still not good enough, and they're making it better. But what's actually happening is I think that what's occurring in the government is not only spilling into what you see in Microsoft, what we see in Oracle, it's going to be spilling into Amazon, into Google, into how you use your mobile phones and so on. So I'm going to talk today about continuous monitoring. I'm going to talk today about scanning in real time and doing something about it. These are things that are really easy to say as a vendor and kind of hard to do as a practitioner. I'm going to give you some real examples about that. So first of all, how many people here are in the C-level suite, right? Are you a manager of a budget or anything like that, right? So only one person here, right? Are you all pen testers, right? You're somewhere in the middle. We got some pen testers here. But the reality is the people who actually control the network are the admins, people who buy software, put the software out there, and the people who run it and configure it. All of this affects them. It's pretty easy to say as a vendor, buy a widget and drop it in. It's pretty easy as a pen tester, hey, I broke into your system. Actually getting stuff done and fixed is really, really hard. And this is what continuous monitoring is all about. So, this is kind of some interesting stuff. So there's a guy at the Department of Homeland Security called John Stroiker. John was at Department of State. He's been quoted a lot, but basically he was the guy who puts up these graphs at the same conferences that said, look, we used to have 1 million vulnerabilities over here, and now we've got a lot less. Right? Now the numbers and the actual counts doesn't really matter. What matters is he was able to get the Department of State to kind of transform how they think about vulnerabilities and risks, right? It's not about what you hear about scanning. What do you do with the vulnerability scanner with the report, right? You print it out, you give it to the IT folks, you come back a year later, and then what? Same vulnerability. We got to fix that problem, right? So this continuous monitoring thing is about fixing that problem. The approach that they're pushing is a 5-step process, right? So one, scan daily, focus on attack readiness, fix daily, great person when home managers are accountable. Now we're going to kind of go through this, and I want to hear from you if you think this is bullshit, right? If you're like, oh, this won't work in my organization. Typically what I can do is say, well, where you're at, yeah, it's not. You've got some sort of management problem, or you've got a budget problem, or something there, you're not looking at it the right way. What this really means is a death to patch windows, right? And that kind of freaks people out. How many people here have a 30-day patch window? Right? So as the CEO of Tenable, I've got customers where 30 days is something they're striving towards, right? A lot of times with patch windows, you're guaranteeing a hacker a window of a vulnerable system to exploit your system. You're giving it to them. You're also giving people an excuse to patch on day 29. Right? If you have a 30-day patch window, they wait until day 29. I'm still compliant, right? I'm still compliant. So that's what they're kind of going after here. Now what's occurred in the government is they're very, very aware that they are getting out, right? There's a lot of adversaries coming in. And we can talk about China, Russia, the FBI, and the NSA, whoever's on your hate list today, and basically talk about breaking into the network. But the reality is you got to make the cost of the adversary breaking it higher than it needs to be today. So, scanning daily, what does that actually really mean? How many people here know Nmap, know Nessus, right? Right. How many people scan every day on their network? Paul does, right? You raise your hand right here, sir. You scan every day. What do you do with the results? Cry. All right. What do you do with the results?
You get past routine and goes after it.
They get past routine. That's great. And then somebody back there, right here.
I send them to my interns to make them fix the whole
Absolutely. So how else besides what the vulnerabilities? How else can you get vulnerabilities? What is another? If I said, look, you got to put one hand tied behind your back, but you have to figure out all the vulnerabilities in this large bank who's got 1,000 Windows desktops. What's another way you can get all those vulnerabilities? Anybody?
This configuration.
SOS. How about an agent, right? Can I get some love for like a big fix or a security or something like that? That works, right? What's another way? What if I said, look, you can't install an agent? I want to get another vulnerability.
Just go up to the system admin developers and ask them how many patch vulnerabilities.
You can go up to the system administrators and ask them, right? Said another way, you can talk to the asset inventory, the people who bought stuff, right? Hey, what do I have out there? What's been deployed? You can ask them. What's another way?
Watch the network traffic.
Watch the network traffic. You can learn a lot about a SYNAC packet, right? If it comes from port 80, it might be a web server, right? If it's got a banner that says Apache, it's probably Apache, right? Of course, you can fake that, but let's not talk about that for a second. There's even other things you can do. You can actually gather logs, right? If you have Splunk and you see a bunch of MySQL logs in there, and you ask the admin, do we have any MySQL? And he says no, he's lying, right? You can do things like that. So there's lots of ways to get vulnerabilities, right? The question is, if you're going to scan daily, you need to do something with that data. You need to trend it, right? Now that graph right there, I got values coming up and coming down and going up, coming down. You would be surprised if you have different types of packet cycles going on, what it means to actually graph and plot that stuff out on a daily basis. Now you've all seen, we're here in the physics building, right? We've all seen sine waves and things like that. If you're measuring your vulnerabilities at the top of that sine wave, it looks like you've got a flat line. Or maybe you're measuring at the bottom of that, that's a problem, right? Well, when do you think a lot of organizations graph their vulnerabilities? They don't graph them at the end of the month, right? They graph them the day after Patch Tuesday, right? So if you do a vulnerability scan on Patch Tuesday, what do you have? You don't really have any meaningful data. You've got all this vulnerability data. It's really more subject to what came from Microsoft or Red Hat the day before. So being able to measure vulnerabilities on a continuous basis is a really, really interesting thing. Now at Tenable, we try to push that out in real time, right? Obviously we passive, log, and scan, and we try to do this in real time. But you know what? What does real time really mean? Most of you should have said bullshit, right? You can't do a vulnerability scan in real time. But at scale, what does it really mean to measure vulnerabilities for 10,000 computers? If you can actually measure that daily, that's pretty good. What's kind of state of the art right now? Who's PCI compliant? Right? What's PCI say? How often do you have to do a scan with PCI? Or at least pass one? Once a quarter, right? Hey, once a quarter, I'm looking good, right? The worst time to scan for PCI, though, is at the end of the quarter when you're finding out, hey, I'm not compliant. Well, now you have to rush and get things compliant and so forth. The federal government, when they came out with continuous monitoring, what's continuous to that? What's the number they throw? You have to scan the network every what?
30 days.
Every 30 days. You know what you have to submit? As the federal government, you have to submit to the Department of Homeland Security a list of all your IP addresses, a list of all your vulnerabilities, a list of all your CPEs, your OSs and your apps, and also all your configurations. Now, it's not as detailed as the vulnerabilities per host. It's just, hey, how many CVE 2013-0011s do you have? They don't care how you get it. You can lie, right? I don't think a lot of them do, but they basically want to track that, right? Now, there hasn't been a lot of work done that I've seen on doing something about that or publishing statistics within the government, but that's going on right now. Now, a lot of organizations have to struggle to go from scanning, once a quarter, once a year, to basically scanning every 30 days. Now, what are some issues putting an agent on every desktop at a large organization? Just walk in and put an agent out there. Has anybody wanted to deploy some sort of host-based agent and got shot down? What happened?
Just the bureaucracy bureaucracy and people concerned about technical issues and we're going to make the machines too slow. People concerned about privacy issues. People concerned about configuration management.
Absolutely.
It's just a laundry list.
So a lot of points there. The first one, though, is bureaucracy, right? Now, how about scanning? Can anybody walk into their organization and just say, hey, I'm going to light up the vulnerability scan of the whole network? Same issue, right? Blame, performance, things like that. What about scanning with credentials? What about scanning with admin? Scanning with I want to SU root. I see it.
That's a fight.
It's a big fight, right? It's less of a fight in the federal government because they mandate it, but even in commercial organizations, hey, we want to talk to them. Now, what about letting the pen testing team have access to SUS and DigFix and SECM? Some people shake their heads no. Some other people say absolutely, right? I'd rather give them access to the full patch database than give them admin access. There's a lot of these things that are being tossed around. Again, most organizations don't really care how you track these vulnerabilities. They just want you to track them and so on. So that's scanning daily. Now, if you have these big pile of vulnerabilities, what are you going to do with it? As an industry, we often make the mistake of just charting the vulnerabilities that are out there. We rank them by severity, we rank them by CVSS score. What we don't do is we don't say, how does this affect my network? As an industry, we've done a really, really poor job, in my opinion, of basically saying, counting vulnerabilities and putting a risk score on that versus saying, how does this really affect my business? For example, on that top line, I'm graphing vulnerabilities versus old vulnerabilities. This is a very traditional chart you're going to get with a modern GRC style of product. We're going to track how well am I doing fixing patches or things like that. And notice if I have a 30-day patch window, maybe that blue line is the line that I care about, vulnerabilities that are older than 30 days, or if the green line is the ones I have today that are going to get fixed, assuming my IT guys know something. That other line right there, that yellow line, basically says, hey, look, I've got vulnerabilities that I know are exploitable. And I actually pulled these from some of our customers. They actually did a good job. If you look at that bottom line, the green line's kind of going up, and they've had this huge drop-off in vulnerabilities. They did a good job. They patched the crap out of their network. But as far as the number of things that were exploitable, they actually made very, very little difference. Very, very little difference. Now, maybe that was that one Java thing that everybody needed, or some Flash thing, or some other vulnerability, who knows what. The idea they were not focusing on what it means to be vulnerable, to be exploitable, and so on. Does anybody have any stories like this? Anybody, hey, they did a big patch, they actually did?
I actually don't have a story. I actually have a question for you. One of the things that I thought was really interesting in the newer versions of Nessus is the ability to search by what's in Metasploit, core impact, and stuff like that. I'm actually curious, are you seeing customers putting priority on stuff where there's public exploit code?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things Joe asked was that, so Temples and Makers of Nessus, right? And one of the things we've been doing recently is tagging all the vulnerabilities with basically all this other metadata, right? One of the things is, does this vulnerability have an exploit, right? And we tag that against core, against meta, against immunity, against a couple others as well. And this really allows you to basically create charts like this. This is actually the component of our product called Security Center. We said, look, not only graph the vulnerabilities that are out there, but also graph in real time the number of vulnerabilities that I'm exploitable to on a given day. We're seeing a lot of organizations leverage this tagging because it really allows them to do some interesting things. I've got another chart later that we'll show, what actually says, hey, this server had no vulnerabilities, but it was exploitable for the entire month of June, so like a bar chart, but then obviously when you get to July, it drops off. So you know that during the month of June, this server was extremely not only vulnerable, it was exploitable. Now that has dramatic impact from an incident response point of view, or if you have to react to an attack that occurred during that time, versus just, hey, looking at the vulnerabilities that were there on a certain thing. But this is deeper than just correlating exploits with vulnerabilities. This is talking about what do you care about. So in other words, if you've got a DNS server on the inside of your network that is serving up DNS queries for your internal network, and you have another DNS server for your DMZ, and they both have the same vulnerabilities, they probably don't have the same risk ratings or effect on your organization. Now we can argue, are you worried about an insider threat or an outsider threat? But surely you shouldn't just lump all those vulnerabilities into one spot and hopefully that line goes down, right? And to me that was state of the art in the 90s and for the last decade, where organizations just tried to drive the number of vulnerabilities down and not really drive the actual risk down, right? So the big point here and again, these five things, the scan daily, now we're on preparing for attack readiness, these all come from John Stroiker, who's basically in charge of the CyberScope program, but we're also pushing this out to the industry, to academia, and different things like that. That make sense so far? All right, good. So, after you're focusing on attack readiness, this is where things really get interesting. Basically, you're saying, look, you have to fix daily. You cannot have that 30-day patch cycle and just assume that you're going to wait to that day 29 and patch. Now, a lot of times people say, well, where do these 30-day patch cycles come from? These 90-day patch cycles come from? They came from standards like ITIL and COVID. And they don't, you can't read them directly and say that. But basically, you have this concept of a control, right? So if you know you're not patched 100%, what do you do if you still want to operate? You have to have some other compensating measure, right? You could have a firewall, you could have an intrusion detection, intrusion prevention system, you could have an antivirus, you could have some control that says, look, I know this Windows system or this Solaris system is indeed vulnerable, but I still want to operate on it. I still want to operate. So for the last 20 years, the whole industry has been basically saying, hey, look, we know we're vulnerable, but we're going to layer all this stuff on top of it, and we'll be fine. Not really, right? I mean, antivirus is great, but it's bypassable. IDS is great, but it's bypassable. Firewalls are great, but you know, it only works so far. You know, basically what they're saying here is, look, we cannot wait to push these patches. Now, this is really, you know, I've been giving talks like this, and I've been there's no way, I don't have the resources, right? There's no way. There's no way I'm going to deploy an Oracle patch the day that Oracle patch comes out from Oracle, right? And that's true, right? But the idea is you also shouldn't wait to the very, very last second if you have a 90-day patch window to do this. You should be able to look at these patches and respond to them accordingly. A lot of times what I've seen in large organizations is that what happens is that they wait to the absolute most convenient time to deploy a patch and not when it's most effective to mitigate an attack on the industry. So again, kind of interesting stuff, the way to look at this. But the point is getting the IT teams in shape so they can deploy these patches in pretty much either near real time or a lot faster than they've been doing. Now, what's the worst kind of patch window somebody's seen on their network? Where they've gone and they've done a scan and they're missing patches and the patches are out of date. You know, has anybody seen a 30-day out of date? All the time, right? Somebody laughing. How about 90? 90. Somebody want to go for more than a year? All right, so let's just go. Okay, so more than a year ago. How old was it?
I've seen 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
I've seen people still
8
running on
years.
Sun OS.
Sun OS, right. So, and these are probably at places we all shop at, that we do business with, that run the federal government. That it's stuff that gets forgotten, right? And absolutely, there's always a reason to run stuff, right? And Chris talked this morning and says, yes, we still have companies with mainframes. Of course, there's always going to be some antiquated technology. Hopefully it's behind layers of firewalls in the basement and nobody knows about it, right? But if you're talking about your entire workforce, like we did a podcast a while ago, Jack, where there was a, I forget, it was the Internet Explorer, but, you know, people were having to work the weekends to basically patch Flash and Internet Explorer. Otherwise, they had to zero. This was just a couple of MS Tuesdays, probably like a couple months ago or whatnot. The point is, if that was their only defense against this stuff, patching stuff out of cycle, you know, they're totally screwed when it comes to looking at things like this. Now, how many people are going to walk in the office on Monday and say, hey, yeah, I heard Ron Gula talk. We got to start patching stuff sooner than later, right? So what are some issues people have deploying patches quicker? Anybody? It breaks stuff. Testing. What was the worst thing? I deployed a patch and it broke something story, right? Has anybody pushed a patch to every Windows desktop and had it crash? Anybody? Really? You had that happen recently?
I forget, it was an MS vulnerability, and Microsoft's gotten a lot better over the last several years.
They have.
But if you go back 3, 4 years, maybe 5 years ago, they released some patches which really affected the machines and created a nightmare.
I'll be honest, most of this stuff here is really focusing on the desktop. Right? I mean, surely we're not saying take the Oracle patch and patch it right away, right? But on the desktop, where APT, where phishing, where all that stuff is targeting us these days, we really cannot afford a long time. The last big outage I've seen is the McAfee outage, where they pushed the wrong antivirus thing and they took McAfee out. Jim?
I'm actually really curious, in your situation, does it help you being an executive for your company going to some of these customers who are looking at deploying System Center? I've got a customer who's a financial services firm, and because they do student loans, they have a lot of federal regulations that they adhere to. So they're evaluating System Center and they're evaluating all these products. Does it really help that you're an executive when you go talk to a lot of these? Is it the peer thing versus us
Yeah,
nerds?
so Joe made two
doing the
comments.
talking?
We eat our own dog food at time, right? We try to patch, we try to do these things, but we're 200 people, right? I mean, I think the maximum count we have is maybe 3,000 systems with all the virtualization we have and stuff like that. That pales in comparison to a lot of these major banks. I was at a Morgan Stanley event, they put a slide up, they had like 150,000 desktops
Right,
and 180,000 servers. And I put that on a slide, and that just blew me away, right? When you look at somebody like at NASA, somebody like the NSA, somebody like at a Google, their numbers are off the chart, right?
Right.
So what we do at Tenable is completely different on their scale. However, it still applies. It still applies.
but I'm talking specifically that you're an executive and you're kind of talking at the 50,000-foot view. Are you finding that's more important when getting this stuff across than us coming in nerd herd and
Yeah. So I'm not going to say that like the pen testing and the exploits, you still need that. You absolutely need that, right? But if this kind of information is not at the board level, if it's not at IT, if they don't know how they're being managed and judged, if they don't really know what they're exposed to on a daily basis, they're not going to make the right decisions. And that's what we're seeing, right? What we're seeing as an industry is, look, there's been a lot of investment in GRC, there's been a lot of investment in patch management, there's a lot of investment in SIMs, but what's happening is we're still getting known, right? Look at all the major APT operators. All these guys have, some of them were SIM product vendors, right? So the question, we have to do something different, right? And basically what continuous monitoring is saying is, look, audit your network, audit it faster, use automation, and hold people accountable. So that's really the big difference. I think you had a question? Okay.
So how does it fit with Bring Your Own Disaster?
So how does this fit with BYOD, right? So we're actually going to talk about the same critical controls in a little bit, and I think even things like that have avoided mobile to a certain extent. But the reality is it still fits into your model, right? You can audit mobile. It's pretty easy to audit, right? Nessus can audit mobile. You can buy MDMs to audit mobile. You can passively discover mobile, right? So if you're choosing not to audit it to the expense, that's on you. But there's technology today that can audit mobile and prevent it, right? Most NACs, like Forescout and stuff, can keep that off your network. So if that's a concern, you can take care of it. Absolutely. Other questions, other comments? Cool. So, fixed daily. Now that everybody's going to patch all their stuff on a daily basis, the question is how do you want to track that, right? Again, if you're not doing that daily vulnerability scanning, whether you're sniffing the network, scanning the network credentials, talking to the patient, you're never going to be able to put up a real-time graph like this. If your IT folks are saying, yeah, we're patching everything, we're good. How do you know? How do you know? The best example I can give is we did a bake-off between Tenable and Foundstone, this large three-letter government agency, right? And they said, hey, look, we're going to do really good against Foundstone. I'm happy about that. But he said, we're rolling out BigFix. I said, okay, I'd rather you benchmark us against BigFix. Why is that? Well, we test for everything they do, right? With credentials, you guys have all done a credential, Nessus scan. They were only pushing Windows patches, right? So when you went to BigFix and you asked the IT guy, have you pushed all the patches? Yes, we pushed all the patches. They pushed all the Windows patches, right? I'm a Windows admin, right? That's the kind of issues we're having in these bureaucratic organizations, right? And of course, okay, yeah, we did Flash. What about QuickTime? What about Skype? What about VLC? What about all these different things that are going to own us? So there's definitely an issue. So if you're not taking your daily vulnerability scans and auditing your network to do this kind of stuff, you're never going to be able to track how well your IT guys are going to do. So, 4, grade personally. Now this one really, really freaks out a lot of people. If you're an IT person, if you're an admin, who do you want to be? The last thing you want to do is talk to people, talk to end users, right? You want to be the person behind the scenes, right? And the last thing you want to do if you're in security is come in and say, you right there aren't doing a good job, right? You right there aren't doing a good job. You'll get kicked out, right? You will get kicked out. That's just as bad as it coming in and saying, oh, look at all these vulnerabilities, we're going to totally own, our IT people don't know what we're doing. Bad move, right? Bad move. As a consultant, maybe you can be a bit more honest as an internal security auditor, but the reality is if you don't make it personal, it's really, really hard to do that. Now, how do you take an IP address and make it personal? What's one way to correlate an IP address to a user?
Asset management.
Asset management, right? A physical location, right? Distributed security officers, having some knowledge of those kind of things. Having a knowledge of how your organization is divided up. Now, maybe you're in an organization, I had somebody point this, but it's wrong. We don't have any of those people at our organization, right? It's all distributed. We've done 9 acquisitions. Great. At least now you know how to approach the problem. But most of the times, most organizations I talk to have some type of IT organization, security audit organization, taking vulnerability scans and mapping them to organizations that have a human element to them, where there's some sort of responsibility, is the only way you can actually get this stuff out there. Who's Matt from NASA? Matt?
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yes.
I remember his last
So these same 5 points that I heard John Stryker talk, I got this from the SANS conference about 2 years ago in Baltimore. But they actually started this, Matt Lynn is his name. So Matt is a security auditor for NASA. He wrote this tool, takes NASA's, he takes our passive home scanner, and it's kind of like his own management console, where he actually has the admin's name. Now NASA's a very, very unique environment, right? They might have, let's just say they have 10,000 servers out there, they probably have 10,000 administrators to go with it, right? So it's very, very, this admin matches this server right here. And they were grading it. How fast they could patch, how vulnerable they were. Do they have any internet exploited facing? All the kind of things we're talking about, he built this in a GUI. But he said personally, what's that?
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, right?
Did he do prizes? Was it like a game, like prizes?
It was a little bit of gamification, you could rank and stuff like that. But he actually told me, he goes, look, we really, really had to like work with the admins for like a year. I need a year to clean my stuff up, right? I need a year to change the way I'm doing things. And that's great. John Stryker said something very similar at Department of State. Now, when you think of Department of State, what do you have? You've got embassies, you've got national, pretty easy to have this hierarchical idea of how we're looking at that. He said, in order to have these communications and to get the trust of the administrators, the stakeholders out there, you really, really had to have some buy-in. Especially if you're pointing to an embassy and saying, hey, you guys stink, you guys have this one problem, you've never fixed it. Well, yeah, but we need this to use the Department of State blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay. So literally they needed functionality like passing the risk acceptance to this other group. Maybe it was a video teleconferencing thing. Great, make it the video teleconferencing thing. This is complex software at that point. You have a lot of enterprise bells and whistles. The point is, if you can't do this with a commercial tool, if you can't do it with an open source tool, you immediately start doing it with a spreadsheet and start visualizing this kind of stuff to the rest of your organization so they can actually get a sense of the balance. I still see, as much as I like to talk about our products, as much as I like to track my competition, when I talk to most CIOs and CSOs at major banks, they're like, look, yeah, I give a spreadsheet. I basically do this, I use a spreadsheet, I put it in a form my board understands, and that's just the way it is. But that's, making it personal is really, really important. Now, there's the gamification type of thing, where you can say, hey, if Group A's got more votes than Group B, maybe we can play some games there. That's a lot of fun. But most organizations just want to know how good they're doing compared to other organizations. There's sort of a natural ability for humans to want to compete, to want to do better, to want to improve, and security is no different. Any questions, any comments so far? Sir?
So how do you approach the fact that usually IT holds the budget for this, and they come back to you, we don't have a budget to do this, we don't want to be graded?
So the question was, how do we approach an IT organization? Look, we don't have the budget to do this, right? So the question is really, do you believe that, right? If you believe that, they don't have the budget. I have people today who do not do vulnerability management. They do not have an intrusion detection system. They don't have a firewall. They are doing low-cost stuff. If they're really, really like that, I hope they're not launching rockets or holding my personal data, right? It's really difficult to do that. Compliance is a really, really big thing. Now, I saw some people nod their heads yes, some people nod their heads no. I will tell you, compliance is the biggest driver for the security industry right now. It is not stopping hackers. As much as we've seen things like the rise of APT, the news of China hacking us and things like that, it's still compliance, right? The cost of demonstrating compliance is still much larger than the cost of preventing people from breaking in. Having said that, trying to show that an organization should spend money to do something is a really, really interesting exercise. A harder question is, we need to change how we're doing things. And that's really where it comes down to. Trying to understand what the risk and what's on the business to really make sense of that is a harder thing. Did somebody have an IT budget story where they, hey, we wanted to go do this and it didn't fly? No. So in your case, were you thinking about something in particular, sir?
Well, I've tried to do some of this similar, and basically what I got from the IT type department was, you know, we don't want to be graded, we hold the budget, and we don't have enough of it to go do what you're saying, so go away.
So I've been in that situation, and the thing that you have to do is you have to make them responsible, right? If that's what's going to happen, you need to say, look, I'm not going to be the person responsible for security then. I clearly can't do my job at that point, and so on. And you need to be able to take that to the board, to the investors, to depending on who you are, perhaps the media, right? I mean, this is the day and age of whistleblowers, right? So if you're working at a government agency and they're not spending money on security, keeping our data safe, what can you do, right? You can go to audit, you can go to IT groups. There's a lot of things you can do. Joe?
I have a story for that one. I did a penetration test and found that the database passwords for a web server, because of a parsing vulnerability, would display, and it got spidered by Google. So you could see the database password whenever you Google this company. I mean, just Google xyzcompany.com and you can see the database password string. The developers actually told us in the algorithm that it would cost $80,000 in man hours to fix, and they refused to fix it. So what we did was we broke out a big SDLC map and showed that per vulnerability it was going to cost them $60,000 in man hours per vulnerability to fix, and then we gave them some OLAP standards saying that 15 to 20% of all code that we audit is going to be vulnerable. So what you're looking at, and I just told the executive, I said, look, sir, what he's telling you was right. Now, when you want to say that every web server that you have, you're willing to spend $60,000, $80,000, $90,000 in man hours to fix all this code that you push to production. And as soon as you start putting real dollar figures to stuff, when they started looking at $250,000 in security vulnerabilities that they needed to fix because it was publicly displayable, getting them to implement a secure SDLC, they finally did it. So they brought in, Fortify, they brought in all these source code analysis tools. That's my one time where I was able to say, you know what, we can assign a dollar figure to these. And if the whatever group doesn't want to do it, go to somebody and show them the money. Show them the money. There's a dollar figure that you can usually associate, whether it's man hours, business impact, hours without security incident. There's usually some sort of way that you can quantify them not doing their job. And you can say, okay, well, this is what you're willing to spend, sir, and then here's going to be the penalties in the compliance side.
I still believe the compliance is the biggest driver. There's another argument that the IT people won't buy, but that is that if you implement repeatable builds, standard configs, standard patching cycles, standard desktops, you have a reduction in IT costs because you have a reduction in variability. That makes a lot of people go to sleep. It really does. But if you go to talk to the finance officer and say, I can save money, our IT people, letting people use any browser, use any OS is increasing, any BYOD is causing us to spend more money, that's an interesting argument as well. So yeah. So the whole point of this is to make it personal. So if you're sitting there as an auditor and you're talking about reductions in vulnerable IPs, reductions in CVEs, reductions in things that make you more vulnerable to attack, that might not just play well from a finance point of view, from an IT point of view. It might really not play from a business point of view. And that's the whole point about making it personal. If you can't draw that connection, you're not going to do that, and you certainly are not going to do it in real time. If you start throwing that data out on a daily basis, I've seen customers of ours they do a Nessus scan, they put the Nessus scan on SharePoint, and they think, why is nobody patching anything? Right? Why is nobody fixing anything? The same darn remote is still on our internet-facing thing, even though I've been putting it out there in real time, and I've been writing strongly worded emails. It's just not, it's not. So you have to take that next step and understand your business. Now, finally, the fifth step is really about holding things accountable, holding the managers accountable. And this is really where it comes. This is not a budget thing. This is you have to hold the managers accountable to do more with what they have. So when I first started out in this industry, I went to a talk from a gentleman by the name of Ira Winkler. And Ira Winkler gave the Wizard of Oz story, right? And what's the point of Wizard of Oz?
Jugs? Jugs?
Drugs? Yes, Pink Floyd, right? All that kind of stuff. No, the Scarecrow already had his brains, right? The Lion already had his courage, right? Dorothy was already home, right? You have stuff in your organizations right now that you've already deployed, already paid for, you're just not turning it on, right? Firewalls, do you do outbound apples, right? Antivirus, you probably paid for that enterprise deployment of antivirus. Do you actually have it on every desktop configured correctly, right? Ask the New York Times how they feel about that, right? Vulnerability scanning. You're scanning without credentials, right? You have the power of a credentialed agent-based patch management system. You just got to get over this issue of scanning with credentials, right? Passive monitoring. Hey, we're a switch network. We can't sniff everything, right? Oh, there's lots of places to sniff these days, right? So people, organizations, you already have the ability to go and instrument and monitor your network. It's just up to convincing those directors out there that, look, they're doing that. Now, there's a lot of ways to do that besides this whole budget and efficiency thing that we're talking about. You're on the front line of the cyber warfare. I think I'm the first person who said Cyber Day, right?
I'm jealous not to say that.
All right, sorry about that, sorry about that. But no, the reality is, when you look at all these organizations that get popped, they're organizations like these, they're insurance companies, they're newspapers, they're universities, right? And who's popping them? Script kiddies, terrorists, foreign governments, people stealing IP theft. If this is not moving somebody in your organization to take action, to just do something with more than they already have, right? I talked to a customer the other day. He said, "Yeah, and what kind of IPS do you have?" "We got tipping point." "How many rules you running?" "No, only a couple hundred." Right? The other 1,000, there's too many false positives. I was like, "No, BS. You created too many alerts. You didn't want to pay somebody to go and look at that, right? Why don't you step up your game a bit?" And you know what? Tell you what. How about looking just from the outbound, right? Just prevent things on the outbound so you can feed better alerts into your SIM or things like that. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, where you can actually amp up what you have already to get more of this, get more buy-in from your management. That can include secure code review, as we talked about. There's just a lot more that we can be doing without spending more money. But you got to get the buy-in from the managers and so on. So anyway, that's the 5 points of continuous monitoring. Again, scan daily, focus on attack, fix daily, make it personal, and then hold the managers accountable, right? Now, this conversation is going on right now at a lot of organizations in the federal government, but also a lot of organizations that do business with the Fed. Healthcare, insurance, anybody who provides a service to the Fed, this stuff being pushed down. Anybody who is responsible for basically physical auditing, if they're not the government, is pushing this way. You're seeing things like Fed Cloud, right? This is the kind of stuff that's going on. FedRAMP, I meant to say FedRAMP. So this stuff is all out there. Now, parallel to this though, there's something else going on, and it's the SANS critical controls. Now, I know a lot of people here have been to SANS. You've heard about the SANS top 20. The top 20 is more from a list of vulnerabilities to types of vulnerabilities to now 20 controls. When I first heard about this, I said, you know, the last thing this industry needs is yet another set of standards, and I'm convinced this is the standard that we need. And a lot of the other ones, if you were doing the SANS controls, trying to align yourself to PCI or FISMA or NERC, whatever, would not be a big deal. So how many people here have heard of the SANS controls, right? So a lot of you. What do you think about it? What have you heard so far? Well, thumbs up, okay? Pretty basic stuff. I'm not going to go through 1 through 20, but you know what the SANS controls basically say? The same kind of stuff pilots do before they get in an airplane, right? You know, do you have your flaps work, right? Is there maintenance on your network, right? Or do you have multiple ways? Are you certified? You know, there's all these different things that pilots have to go through before they even take off. This is basic stuff, but when you do it at scale, it gets really, really interesting, right? If you're an organization with 20,000 computers, you know, the first thing on this is an inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices. At 20,000 devices, how do you do that? How do you do it? You know what SANS says? We don't care. You can figure out, you can have whatever policies you want. We're not going to tell you how to figure out whatever you come up with, you need to apply it. You need to have a process to detect what's authorized and unauthorized. Now, I've worked with some of our customers who they claim whatever's authorized is in DNS or Active Directory. So they have a huge thing where they scan with Nessus and they use our security center and they write these regular expressions to say, oh, here's the machine not in DNS or not named properly or things like that. It's unauthorized, right? You know what? It really doesn't matter how perfect that is, right? Somebody from the NSA or the CIA probably could put a silent device on that network. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that Windows NT or that thing that's out there that shouldn't be there that nobody bothers looking for. The printer that's in the wall that we've heard about for 20 years. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's going on. But when you go through this list, the cool thing about the controls is you're actually going to hear like an echo of those 1 through 5 continuous monitoring. They're very, very similar things going on. So John Stroiper from DHS is a big fan of the controls, gave a lot of input to it. But a lot of those continuous monitoring came from NSA. Tony Sagers, this guy at NSA, who was a very senior executive, recently retired, joined SANS. Now, the other cool thing that SANS did, they were able to pull Gartner in. So they actually got an analyst from Gartner called John Pescatore. He's the guy in charge of SIM, I think VM, maybe IDS, I apologize for that. He knew a lot of commercial stuff. John basically said, look, this has legs not only in the federal government, but in the commercial government, because it speaks the same language as COVID and ITIL and people who give a darn about budgets and things like that. So, SANS controls, a lot of thumbs up. Any questions on SANS? Any comments on SANS? Other than every time you say SANS, we have to say Ed. SCOTUS, absolutely, absolutely. So, with that, I'll take questions. I mean, that's basically what I wanted to talk about here. If you want to learn more about Tenable, we're at tenable.com. We make Nessus. I'm not going to give you the whole sales pitch. And Joe mentioned our product a couple times. We have a solution called Security Center Continuous View, which is basically a combination of real-time scanning, config auditing, log analysis, passive network monitoring, botnet detection, and malware detection, and it doesn't suck. It's actually really cool. It's the same code base, and it scales with the DoD buy. You guys can look at it too if you want. So other questions, other comments?
Do you have like a demo copy here?
Yes. Feel free to comment. Sir?
Yes, in large organizations today, there's starting to become this awareness of the topics you're talking about. You know, there's the need for continuous vulnerability scanning, applying the principles of point critical security controls, and that hasn't necessarily filtered into those organizations yet, although it's starting to on the large enterprise level, federal government, big insurance companies, banks, and so on. But what happens down in the media market space, where you've got staffs that are hard pressed to keep up with the demands of all the changes within the industry, and yet here's another thing in the management level that pushes your direction doesn't have this yet.
So the question is, how do these controls kind of apply to the smaller companies and stuff like that?
Translated on to medium-sized businesses.
So one of the things I kind of pride myself on is entrepreneurship, helping people get started in security and things like that. And frankly, we've had guys and ladies, use Nessus, and now they're the CIO is small, or the director of IT, director of security and stuff like that. When they look at PCI and FISMA for their network, it's kind of tough, right? When you look at the controls, this is a really, really easy framework to manage a 100-person network with 100 images at Amazon. It's a really, really good framework for small universities, big universities. And I've just seen a lot of people say, hey Ron, I took this new job. First thing I did the gap analysis next to the controls. You know what, we were doing some of these already.
Yep.
And I was able to speak to my CFO, my CIO, and kind of move forward. So I do see it being used.
The framework is great, but in an organization that may not have had knowledge of this, and you're the only guy in the shop that gets this, implementing this can be almost a full-time job, and it requires dedication of resources, namely my time to go into the organization and implement this. And,
It does. So actually, Jack Daniel and I, for Tenable, we actually did a whole podcast, or a webinar on this.
Yeah.
One of the things about the controls that you can do is when you do your gap analysis, you can basically do your benefits, you do your win-loss, and you can basically prioritize which controls you should do. I'm not gonna lie to you, right? I mean, there's basically SANS did a survey, and they're gonna be publishing the results. Not everybody implements all 20 controls, right? But a lot of people implement a few. The question is, which one is right for you? What's your most gain? Cool. Other questions? Other comments?
Well, in my talk, people were asking, saying how the antivirus, firewalls, C-level executives tend to latch on to those, I think, because they're easy to generate metrics around. But what we really need to do is all that stuff, and it costs people time and maybe some budget outside of the AV firewalls. How do we convince management to get there?
So the question is, how do we put the right metrics in front of management? And the issue with metrics is, so if you're a disciple like the Dan Gears of the world, he says it doesn't really matter what you track as long as you track something, and it means something to the people out there. So if you want to amp up from antivirus or intrusion detection, you're graphing the number of detected things, that kind of justifies your AV. But if you were actually going to graph number of systems that had 100% coverage of McAfee or Symantec, That tells a completely different story. So my comment there is, how do you put a graph out that doesn't get yourself fired, right, and make something cooperative with the rest of your IT? It's a fine balance. It's a really fine balance. Sir?
I say every time a executive management has to sign those statements to say they're doing all this, I'd say they're doing it for you in a way.
You would be surprised how many C-level execs lose a lot of sleep over this. And that actually, it's usually not a funding issue. I mean, and here in America, at least, we spend a crap load of money on routers, switches, operating systems, things that patch and manage those things, right? A lot of times, this is something that's met with really, really open arms. It's not so much of a budget. Yes, I know the economy's kind of slow and stuff like that. The reality is, there's actually a lot of spend in IT. It might not be on more antivirus, right? But there's a lot of spend going on still. And then, things moving to the cloud is just an opportunity to do things right, do things better. Last question.
How do you do this gap analysis? I work for two departments on students' computers, computers at 25 years old, and so forth. And we have Windows, Macs, all sorts of Linux.
So the question was, and you said you're right from here, Brown?
Yeah.
So your question is, how do we do this gap analysis on student computers, on systems that are maybe 25 years old, and things like that? You can definitely do that. So you have the question is, what problem are you trying to solve? I work with a lot of universities, and sometimes we say, hey, look, we're going to start with a server farm where maybe our private student information is, right? And that thing that's 25 years old, that might be the physics department, Hadron Collider, anything, whatever. Maybe we'll get to that later, right? So you just figure out where to prioritize, hopefully in partnership with your executives and your CIOs. If you have any auditors from the state, figure out where to start. That's a good place. More and more universities I talk to are dominated by the hospital that's on the network. I apologize. I mean, is there a University of Brown hospital?
Yes, there is.
There is. You know what? Hospitals usually have budget. They have staff that does things for medicals. It's a different thing than a university. I've actually seen more than one university take the hospital staff and use that for the rest of the organization. Now, a student laptop is a little bit different than a computer that's got healthcare records on it, but that's just a point to start with. Cool. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. I love you guys.